or Dr. Kevin Randall, I should say, he pulled out, citing a terrorist attack within 7 days. Well, there was no terrorist attack, and I just fully declined, and I wish him well. If he's going to be taking his debate somewhere else, good luck to him, but it will not happen here on the X Zone. Speaking of Michael Horn, he's going to be my guest tomorrow night in hour number 3. L.A. Marzulli, welcome back, my good friend. We're talking about prophecies, and it certainly does look that the Bible, especially the Ezekiel prophecy, has the events of today dead on. And we have to ask ourselves where they did get this information. Now, what is your hypothesis on how this information was so accurate so many years ago?
Well, you and I've dabbled into this and touched on it on other shows, but I honestly believe that there is an entity, for lack, let's just call it that for the time being, that lives outside our space-time continuum, and that somehow manifests through, or can manifest at all points in time simultaneously, if this entity wants to. And it chooses at some particular point, let's say, to hit the prophet Ezekiel, and he chooses this man, and this man is either transported through time or sees through time or through a vision. Most of these things that Ezekiel gets are their visions. He's seeing a vision. Now, I'm not there. I haven't talked to Ezekiel one-on-one. I'd love to. I'd love to be able to sit down and go, what does it look like? Are your eyes wide open? Are you in a meditative state? Are you completely, normal, let's say, as we would be normal, and all of a sudden something in front of you, kind of a vista opens up, a window opens up in space, and you see the future? I don't know how he saw this, but he did see it. And he penned this stuff over 2,500 years ago. I blogged today on the man. It's like the average Joe, the man on the street, has no idea of what this stuff is talking, is that this prophecy even exists. Most people have never read it, have no idea how it might be playing into what we're looking at in the Middle East today. And I believe that this entity is a very benevolent, good entity. My dealings with the entity have been, I would say, very good and very benevolent. And I think there's, this opens up a whole can of worms we can get into maybe on other shows. But the bottom line is, the reason why I believe, let's say, biblical prophecy over Nostradamus or prophecies, let's say, by the Hopi Indians, is because of the great specificity of the prophecies and their accuracy. It's not like 60% or 80% right or whatever. They're really 100% accurate all of the time. And so, we're looking at the Ezekiel prophecy. It looks like it's shaping up. It looks like it's about to happen. Is this like a week away, 2 weeks away? I don't know. I only know that it's more of these articles are crossing my desk daily. If frequency means anything, it looks like it's happening with greater frequency than what it was, let's say, 6 months ago. Certainly, a year ago, there were signs, there were
rumblings.
Rumblings, definitely, rumors of war in the area. But now it's like daily, 5, 6, 7, even 10 articles, whatever, on what's happening, and everyone's jockeying for position. The U.S. fleet is over there. They've just added 3 more aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf near the Straits of Hormuz. The Russians have a fleet. The Russians and the Iranians are in bed together. The Syrians now have opened up a channel with the Russians, and it's just a question of what, how it comes to play. What's the trigger that sets this thing off? And that's what we're looking at.
L.A. Marzulli is our guest, www.spiraloflife.com, and his blog is lamarzulli.wordpress.com. L.A., the Armageddon, as described in the Bible towards the end times, is very specific as well.
It is. And this is, in my opinion, there are 2 separate wars here. And I realize that, some biblical scholars place the Ezekiel 38-39 war at the end of the 1,000 years of peace, and I don't. I just, and many other scholars, like myself, believe that this happens before Armageddon. The scenario that I believe we're looking at is we'll see this Ezekiel 38-39 war will happen. It will kick off supernatural events that are absolutely unprecedented. It will create this one world government with a one world religious system, and also it begins, in my opinion, the beginning of the 7-year tribulation, which the book of Revelation discusses and talks about. At the end of that is that battle of Armageddon, which all the nations of the world are basically involved in on some level. So that's a whole different deal. In fact, it says in the prophecy, unless those days were short. I mean, this is real sobering stuff. I mean, it's not the type of stuff, you don't tell your kids. You just don't talk about it. I mean, most adults can't handle this. But when you read those words, and it says that unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive. That is an incredibly sobering statement. Unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive. So you see that mankind is now, left to its monstrous self, and it's allowed just to run the full gamut of man's own depravity, which is what we're looking at. And then the entity intervenes and brings about peace, and that's what we're all waiting for. Because we read the end of the book, and we know that the good guys win, and that's what we're hoping for. That's the hope.
That's the
hope. And I think
now,
that will happen.
Now, you were talking about the Hopi Indians a few moments ago.
Right.
Where do they fit into the entire prophecy scenario? Like we've got the Mayan calendar that allegedly ends 2012, and there's a lot of people who are expecting doom and gloom.
Well, the Hopi Indians have some interesting prophecies. They talk about spider webs in the sky, for instance, and some people look at that and say, well, with the contrails, and is that a fulfillment of that? They also talk about a house falling from the sky, a man-made house in the sky. Again, some guy's looking at something in the future, and he sees it, and he has no idea how to describe this thing. He just uses language that he's familiar with, the vernacular, the syntax that he has it readily available. And the Hopi prophecy is that there's a house, above in the sky, and this thing falls. Is it the space station? It certainly could be. That hasn't happened yet. But that's, there's a lot of prophecies throughout time and through different parts. And people look at, Nostradamus, for instance, they're always talking about him. St. Malachi is certainly another one talking about the chronology of the popes, and we're down to the third from the last pope according to Malachi. And I look at these things and I travel on them. But what the difference between those and what is the Bible prophecy, in my opinion, is just heads and shoulders above everything else, in the sense that it's not only one prophet, it's many prophets, and there's no collusion between them. In other words, Ezekiel necessarily didn't know what Isaiah was talking about, and sometimes they're separated by a couple hundred years. So there's no collusion between these prophets, and yet they're all adding on to this thread of prophecy which goes through the millennia right up to our present day. We talked about before the break, if you can make a case that the Psalm 83, the prophecy of those nations going up against Israel, has been fulfilled in the 67 war, I mean, that's amazing. We also know that the third temple will be rebuilt. There was an article that came across my desk today talking about, once again, that third temple, that the Israelis are in negotiations trying to get that temple built. And it's just, the guy who cuts that deal, the figure who allows that to happen, there will be some, one person will bring it about type of a thing. Like, Ronald Reagan is looked at as bringing down the Soviet Union, let's say. I mean, he's the guy that did it. You would pin it on his chest and say, Ronnie, you won, and then Gorbachev with Glasnost and Perestroika and all that, and the Soviet Union just kind of fell of its own weight and dismantled. Well, I think the person that brokers the deal for the Israelis to build that third temple, and the scripture is very, very clear on this, will be none other than the Antichrist. So we're around and we see, it doesn't matter who it is, whoever brokers that deal is, according to Bible prophecy, the Antichrist. He's the guy that does it. So, if we're around at that time, I mean, I'll be blogging on that like crazy. And but see, most people don't know this stuff, Rob. Most people have never read it or even know where to look to read it. And they just, many people have a Bible. It sits on their shelf or underneath their coffee table, and they never crack it open. And it's, my exhortation to your listeners would be, let's not talk religion here. Just open up Ezekiel 38 and read it for yourself in any translation you want. I don't care. It's very, very specific, and it talks about, in the latter days these things will happen. Here's a group of nations which will come up against a land of unwalled villages. There's another line which in itself was completely unheard of in the ancient world. I mean, I mean, in the ancient world, you just didn't have a land of unwalled villages. You had a series of castles and moats and high walls, and that's what you did. I mean, otherwise you'd be, your crops would be taken, you'd rape and pillage, and you'd lose everything. And this was what the ancient world was. And the prophet writes this, a land of unwalled villages, absolutely unprecedented in the ancient world. But the prophet's seeing this, and that's how he writes it. To us, it's no big deal.
In other books, in other religious books, or in other philosophical books around the world, is there any commonality that can be drawn to the prophecies of Ezekiel?
Well, I would say no. There's some interesting prophecies which I kind of touch on a little bit in Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, that the Shia sect of Islam, and I know your next guest is going to talk about this, and this is going to be very interesting. They are awaiting the Imam Mahdi, which some biblical scholars look at as perhaps the Antichrist. Maybe. I mean, who knows who this guy is going to be? I mean, they've got their own eschatology, and it's completely different. It appears different from ours, but what actually, if you know ours, if you know, let's say the Judeo-Christian biblical overview of eschatology or prophecy of how these things happen at the end times, and you're familiar with the advent of the Mahdi and the Shia belief of total chaos, the two they fit very well. They dovetail very neatly together, and they fit very well. Except that it's not what, with all due respect, it's not what the Muslims think. I think they're going to be deceived, but that remains to be seen, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It certainly does.
Yeah.
And if things are happening the way that you believe they are, it's not going to be that long.
I don't think so. I mean, some of the intel I was just reading at the break. I was opening up some emails I haven't gotten to, and one of them talked about some sort of a nuclear exchange around the 15th or 17th of this month in the Middle East specifically. So, whether that's true or not, and where their information is it, apparently it was a leak from Dutch intel or something. But, it's all internet stuff, so who knows, where it's really, the source, and I can't track it I can track it some way, but not,
So what do you think? So what do you think happens after the Great Tribulation? What do you think happens after the war? What happens to the planet? What happens to the survivors that are left in this war-torn planet?
I think it's a 1,000-year cleanup. I mean, I really do. I think that when this thing hits, and when you start looking at the state that the planet is literally left in, where a third of the water and a third of the land and the trees and all this stuff and the animals and just things are just, people dying of plagues, and it's a real mess. I mean, it's just a real mess. And I think that part of this thing will be to restore it and to kind of dismantle the craziness. Look, unless you go and unless you live in a really modern city, let's say like Beijing, what we were shown, and just all the amazing buildings and the water cube and the bird's nest and all. I mean, architectural marvels. I mean, just amazing. That's wonderful. But then you look at Detroit. You get the picture.
Oh yeah.
It's not a nice place to live. And it's really a modern hellhole. With all due respect to people who live there, there are certain sections of it that you just don't want to be in.
But you're going to find that in every city. You're going to find that in every city.
And that's why I think that it's going to be a dismantling of the system that we see today. And is it some sort of an ecotopia? There was a book out 20, 30 years ago called Ecotopia, and it talked about almost like a First Nations people, the way they lived in harmony. Many of the tribes lived in harmony with nature, and I think in some ways, and I'm way out on a limb here. I'm just speculating. In some ways, I think that that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a return to a real balance and a real. It's just going to be different. For instance, let's say the animal kingdom, which there seems to be some sort of a barrier between us interacting with the animal kingdom. Yeah, we have dogs; they're our best friends, right? And we can, every now and then we get to hang with the dolphins or whatever.
Sure.
But what if everything was? What if things changed? What if somehow supernaturally, Deus ex machina, God in the machine type of thing? But what if, because He's all powerful, what if that barrier is broken down all of a sudden? Like instead of, we can look at elephants and stuff, but what if it was all the animals? And the Bible kind of hints at that a child will put his hand down the hole of an asp, which is a very deadly snake, and, you get bitten by an asp, you're dead like in an hour. So, for a child to do that, the lion will lay down with the lamb. It gives us a hint